Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Debits and Credits with Haas and Dawe. And today we're gonna get a little bit away from the escrow world, specifically closing escrows, we're closing title orders, and we're going to talk about employees. Well, actually, employees relative to employees versus independent contractors, or W-2 versus a 1099. And the question that comes up all the time that in our business or relative to what we're asked by clients is it okay to pay somebody as an independent contractor? And in California, the answer is no. And next week, the answer will be no. And next month, the answer will be no. But that's California and the way they take a very strict view on how independent contractors are treated because they prefer to collect payroll taxes. Now, from a federal standpoint, the rulings on independent contractor versus employee are less rigid, but they still have um, a measure as to how someone is determined to be an independent contractor or not. And there are 9 tests that someone needs to go through and look at. And doesn't mean you can't fail one of the tests, but they tend to rely on it if they want to determine someone is being paid on a 1099 basis as an independent contractor when they should be paid as an employee. Now in California, the default is someone is an employee until they can prove it otherwise. And independent contractors are required to have contracts in California. If someone's getting paid by a company as an independent contractor, there's supposed to be a contract. And a contract is going to define a lot of terms relative to determining whether you really are an employee or not. So what are the differences? A 1099, it benefits the employer because then the employer isn't paying payroll taxes. The employer is not paying workers' compensation insurance. Compensation is not paying any benefits. That's for the benefit of the employer. For the employee, the benefit is flexibility. The flexibility is that they can deduct business expenses that otherwise couldn't be deducted by a W-2 employee for federal tax purposes anymore. The perceived notion is that an employee an independent contractor is going to be receiving higher take-home pay because there are no taxes coming out of payment to the independent contractor, but then the independent contractor is responsible for his or her own taxes. And so with the W-2, income taxes are withheld for the employee, and so taxes are paid in. That's a benefit for being an employee. Taxes are withheld and paid in. The downside is you're paying into, I suppose it's a downside, maybe not. You're paying into Social Security and you're paying into Medicare. But you're not paying employer taxes personally. Now also a W-2 employee has the benefit of PTO, paid time off, such as vacation pay, sick pay. Independent contractors normally aren't going to be covered that by the person who's paying them. Workers' compensation insurance, like we talked about, medical insurance, other types of benefits that an employer is going to pay an employee that it's not going to pay an independent contractor. So here's some of the tests to determine who's what, why, how, and when someone is an independent contractor or someone is not. Control is the word. Who controls? Is the employer in control of the employee, or is the independent contractor in control of him or herself? And who has the ability to control? If the employer can determine how and when the employee works, hours, days, what equipment does the person have to use, the equipment of the employer? Does the independent contractor have to come on site and use the equipment of the person who's paying them as an independent contractor, including use of certain computer program, hardware, software, and so who has control over that? Independent contractors, they usually provide services outside the usual course of business, and they would be providing it to multiple clients in multiple markets. And so and they're going to be marketing their services to others than just the one entity, because then it's going to be difficult to say that this independent contractor truly is independent if all they're doing is working for the same company. and they would be otherwise as an employee. And because the IRS, like we talked about before, the IRS is going to be concerned about, well, is that person just trying to get out of, meaning the employer, trying to get out of having to pay payroll taxes? And so the contractor, these independent contractors, they should have their own business license. And particularly in a city like the city of Los Angeles or the city of Beverly Hills, the city of Culver City, where these cities have um, business licenses and a big business licenses, and they're based on gross revenue. And so it's something where they want to, um, they have to, they would, for them to determine that they're not going to be reclassified as an employee, they need to have a business license. They need to show that they're truly on their own. They come and go when they want to, that they control their files and they control their work. The employer doesn't. Now, there's a risk of misclassification on both sides. Let's say on the employee side, the possible risk is all the back payroll taxes. I'm not paying in for the Social Security and the Medicare. And from California's side, not paying in state disability, because state disability is an employee withhold as well. And so that's a risk. On the employer side, the risk is the government, whether it be IRS or for California, the Employer Development Department, EDD, possibly could come back, not possibly, it's going to. They're going to come back and want payroll tax. They're going to want the employer payroll tax. They're going to want the employer share of the Social Security and employer share of the Medicare. They're going to, California EDD is going to want California withholding. They're going to want SDI, which wasn't collected. They're going to want state unemployment insurance, which isn't a lot. It's at the most in today's world, it's 6.2% on $7,000. So you're talking $452. It's not that, but the biggest number is on all the other taxes that weren't being paid. They may require retroactive workers' compensation premiums to be paid, because it could just blow up where someone you're paying as an independent contractor who prefers not to be an independent contractor, they can come back and put in a workers' comp claim and find out that they're not covered. Or they could be putting in for saying they worked overtime and when that wasn't paid from a time and a half standpoint and so on. And so there could be what we call wage and hour claims to Employment Development Departments, the Labor Commissioner, for overtime, for rest breaks or meal breaks that they get now that they otherwise wouldn't necessarily get. And then when they start getting all these assessments for not paying payroll taxes, penalties and interest get added on. And then if you need to, if you're going to push on it, you may need to go and pay for some attorney's costs, legal costs, about trying to get someone misclassified. I don't know if I said that right. Reclassified back to the original classification. It's not an inexpensive proposition. You can have, like in California, you have to have a written agreement, but it doesn't always determine status. It's not covering all the tests, the control, when, where, how, why. How does the person work? Do they do escrows the way they want to do them? Do they have their own software? Are they paying for usage of your software? Are there hours to be where they can come and go whenever they want to? All these things to be considered. That even if there's a written contract, it might not still hold up. Things can get ugly if things get ugly. I want to say that again so you can really grasp it. Things can get ugly if things get ugly. So would you be comfortable defending classification before the EDD or defending it with the IRS in court? It's something that's the question to ask yourself. We're not a big fan of independent contractor status just for the sake of saving payroll taxes, or just for the sake because someone comes to you and says they want to be paid as an independent contractor. Now, in that case, that the burden's going to be on the person because they're coming to you with that request. And if it's something where it's crossed the line too many places, they're still looking like an employee. I mean, our recommendation always is they need to be an employee, because you don't need to get into trouble later. If it's something where it's sort of borderline, or you're comfortable with treating them as an independent contractor, make sure the contract is complete and thorough, and make sure they're taking responsibility for anything that goes awry with the classification that they're putting on themselves. So it's something that can work out until it doesn't work out, and that's where you have to be cautious about it. So W-2 versus 1099. As with many things in your operation, it's a flip of the coin. And at the end of the day, it's what you're comfortable with. And if you're not comfortable doing an independent contractor relationship with somebody, then you don't do it. And you move forward, and the people will be employees, or they'll go, I suppose, go someplace where they can be treated as an independent contractor. But that's how we look at it. And the W-2 is for the employee, the 1099 for the independent contractor. But also, one last note, and with regard to the independent contractors, we talked about employer taxes. With an independent contractor, yes, they have the gross that they get from the company paying them as a contractor. Then they're going to deduct whatever expenses they deduct. Whatever income they have left over on their tax return to pay tax on, they also have to pay in as if they're an employer, meaning Social Security tax and the Medicare tax they have to pay. And not the same as a withhold from their W-2, but they have to pay what we call both halves, the employee portion and the employer portion, what's dealt with on a W-2 situation. It's called self-employment tax. And so what it is that as an independent contractor, on their net income, has to pay tax into Social Security and into Medicare as well. That's today's episode on W-2 versus 1099s. Michael Haas signing off for Debits Credits with Haas and Dawe.